I've been asked to spend the next 20 minutes or so talking about the current business climate and the vote to leave the European Union, Brexit. I think it's important that I tell you that the name Declan is a traditional Irish name that's made up of two parts. The first part is Dec. It translates roughly as a gifted speaker, storyteller, charming raconteur, a very good company. The Lan part translates as not. So that will set the expectations for the next 20 minutes or so. You may have heard me in the past joke about economists and their terrible forecasts. Economists are, they're a bit like Christopher Columbus. When he set off for America, he didn't know where he was going. When he arrived in America, he didn't know where he was. When he got back from America, he didn't know where he'd been. And all of this research had been paid for by a government grant. So he truly is the world's first modern economist. And those of you in the room will know better than me that at recent points in recent British history, the economists have got things wrong. Before the vote to leave the European Union, many of the economists in the city's big banks and investment funds warned of a swift and deep recession if we voted for Brexit. Well, what has happened since the vote for Brexit? Well, the weather got better. We had the hottest September day in 100 years this year. We have yet to detect any plagues of locusts. There hasn't been a famine reported anywhere in the country, nor has there been an immediate recession, and there's not likely to be one either. In fact, we've seen an 11% jump in manufacturing confidence. We've seen the biggest rebound in services in 20 years, and we've seen a strong rise in retail sales and in consumer confidence. And underpinning all of that is something that we've been enjoying in this economy for the last 2 or 3 years now, which is strong growth in the job market, the lowest unemployment since 2005, the highest number of people in paid work in our recent recorded history. So when it comes to forecasts of recession, the city's economists now have a slightly different tune. Morgan Stanley, which had said the economy would shrink by 0.4% between July and now predicts growth, not shrinkage, of 0.3%. For the whole year, it thinks the UK economy will have grown by 1.9%. JP Morgan, another city bank, also expects growth of around about 2%. And the reason they've had a rethink about their forecasts is not just the evidence of their own eyes about how the economy is performing, but because of the actions of the Bank of England, which acted swiftly after the Brexit vote to stimulate the economy. Because the economy did have a heart attack, I suppose you could describe it in economic terms, immediately before and after the vote. We had a slump in confidence and in broad economic activity. We saw manufacturing and construction shrink. We saw recruitment agencies and other informal surveys report that plans to hire new workers were put on hold, and we saw a sharp fall in the value of shares. Now, all of those have since been reversed again. The one impact that hasn't gone into reverse is the fall in the value of the pound. Good for exporters, not so good if you're planning your holiday to California in February. And the Bank of England rushed in because it saw that there was uncertainty. So it cut interest rates again. There was more cheap funding for the banks, and it increased still further the amount of money that it uses to buy government debt and to lend to companies. And the bank rushed in with this action because its agents around the country said that the consequences of the Brexit vote were only just starting to sink in, that businesses were still only now working out what this will actually mean for their business. And I thought your vote today was hugely instructive. More than half of you thinking that Brexit will turn out to be good for Britain, but well over half of you thinking that it will be bad for your business. This is the type of thinking that's going on in boardrooms and on factory floors up and down the country. Businesses are trying to work out, what will this mean for me? What will be the impact of the fall in the value of the pound? What is going to happen to things like inward investment? And that tells us that actually it's too early yet to work out what the economic cost of Brexit might be. if only because Brexit has yet to happen. We'll only see the consequences of it once we conclude that 2-year period of negotiation and we actually withdraw from the European Union sometime in 2 years from next March. And looking at the preparations that are being made, you might be forgiven for thinking that the Leave campaigners didn't actually have a plan if they won the vote, because we still don't have answers to some of the critical questions. Half our trade at the moment with Europe is with Europe, and we're currently in a single market that allows us to trade free of tariff and tax. It also allows us to trade without a significant amount of red tape. Now, do we as an economy, as a business community, as a nation, want to keep those advantages? Do we want to stay in the single market? Do we want to continue to have access to a single market type arrangement? And if we do, what price are we willing to pay for that? Now, Europe up to now has been very clear on what price it expects, that if we want to retain access to the single market, we will have to continue to pay towards the costs of running Europe's political institutions, and that clearly is not going to be acceptable to the British public. The other price of retaining access to a single market is that we allow the free movement of people. And when you look at why people voted for Brexit, that's not going to be much of a starter either, because for a lot of people who voted for Brexit, what they wanted was control over migration. So that very complicated and knotty issue has yet to be resolved. And what about those inward investors that are investing in Britain now? Will they continue to do so if we are not in the EU, or will they move their next model, their next range to the continent? Japan's car makers, for example, were told that they would have access to the EU single market if they built their factories in Sunderland or in Derbyshire. And Japan's government has already suggested that they may halt. They may continue with current production, but they may move future production to the continent. Again, another unknown while the process of negotiation continues. And will the city banks, the insurers, be allowed to continue with uninhibited trade with the European continent? Will they keep their rights to passporting? These are all up in the air. Also up in the air is what type of trade arrangement will we have with other nations outside of Europe in the rest of the world? Can we strike trade deals with them? Yes, of course we can. How useful will those trade deals be when 11% of British companies say, only 11% of British companies say they are willing to trade abroad. The other 89% say they have no interest in exporting, either in Europe or outside of Europe. And that's a challenge as we plan our post-Brexit future. Now, the new Prime Minister, Mrs. May, in a stroke of political genius, she has taken the leaders of the Leave campaign and she has made them responsible for delivering a successful Brexit. She has made the dogs return to their own vomit. So David Davis is now the Secretary of State for Brexit. He's the Minister in charge of divorce. Liam Fox is the Secretary of State for International Trade. He's the Minister for finding us new international customers once we piss off the French and the Germans. And Boris Johnson, as always, remains the Minister for International Embarrassment. Now, Mr. Fox, Liam Fox, said that the bosses of many medium-sized companies were unwilling to export because they were much more interested in playing golf on a Friday afternoon. Well, he's wrong in that. They're not lazy. What they are concerned about is risk. They're running businesses that are doing well at home. Why on earth would they want to gamble at all on a foreign adventure in a market they don't know, selling to customers that they don't understand? This is a perfectly sensible attitude, but it is one that the government will need to change if it wants us to find more custom, more trade in places like China, like India, like Latin America, and in nations like Nigeria and Mexico and Indonesia, the fast-growing new economies of the world. Now, Brexit may not be the decision that you voted for. I'm guessing from our vote that roughly half of you didn't vote for it, but as they say when you ask for directions in some parts of Ireland, I wouldn't start from here if I were going, but this is where we are. The people have spoken. Brexit means Brexit, says Mrs. May, or as one of her colleagues at the party conference said last week, breakfast means breakfast. We know what he meant. And we've now got to do what we've always done in business. We have to make the best of it. We have to start building prosperity in those parts of the country that use the vote to say that globalization had passed them by, that opportunity was too infrequent a visitor to their parts of the country. We need to improve education and training to give people a fighting chance in an economy that's going to be driven by knowledge. We need to improve infrastructure, communications, and access to finance to allow those parts of the nation to be better connected with the global business community. And we need, and economists have been arguing this for decades, we need to improve our productivity, because it's only through higher productivity that we can afford pay rises and higher living standards in the future. And the sad fact is that the UK is less productive than most major nations, and we have been for decades, for a whole variety of issues, including the ones identified there: skills, access to finance, the state of infrastructure. But even within the UK, there are big differences. London is enormously more productive than the rest of the UK. The northwest of England, the Midlands, Wales and Northern Ireland, they all lag behind, trapped in economies that are predominantly low skills and low wages. Now, the new Chancellor, Philip Hammond, will make his first big policy announcement in the autumn statement on the 23rd of next month. We've had some clues already. Mr. Hammond has relaxed George Osborne's austerity rules, rules on borrowing and spending. He's going to take a little bit more time to pay back the national debt. So we may see some more money freed up for investment in infrastructure and skills and such like to stimulate growth. And it's important that at the very least we have the conversation about doing that, because the Bank of England, whilst it's been cutting interest rates and pumping more cheap credit into the economy, alongside the European Central Bank, alongside the Bank of Japan, alongside the Central Bank in China, they are all now having a discussion about the limits of their ability to stimulate economies. Central banks are warning us that they are running out of options when it comes to keeping economies ticking over, and it is now back to governments to make decisions about increased spending and investment to stimulate economic growth. Howard talked in his remarks earlier this morning about the importance of Rectra lobbying government on this and on so many other issues, and the conversations that they've been having with the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, BEAS as it is now known. Could be worse, could have been obese, but BEAS is what it is. And that department had a changed name to reflect a new priority for industrial strategy. Now, it's known that the government also wanted to give more priority to productivity, and it briefly considered that the name of the department should be the Department for Productivity, Energy and Industrial Strategy. But then they worked out what that would be shortened to: productivity, P, energy, EN, industrial strategy, IS. You can see why they dropped that idea after just a few minutes. But these are the things that government will encourage us to improve, and as a business community we will continue, while the negotiations for Brexit carry on, we will continue to invent and to innovate. We'll still make aero engines for the world's planes. We'll still make the medicines to cure the world's diseases. We'll devise apps and develop software that's used by customers all around the globe. We will act as the banker and the insurer for the rest of the world. And we will carry on buying and selling with Europe, which will remain our biggest trading partner while the deals are thrashed out. And we will step up our efforts to find new customers for our products and services in those faster growing parts of the world: Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, Turkey and Vietnam. Our divorce from Europe may have some positive aspects to it, I think. It may be a shock therapy that knocks British business out of its comfort zone, that shifts our attention away from a European economy that is increasingly aging and stagnant, and forces us to make a better effort in these other parts of the globe. It may also force essential reforms in Europe itself, forcing the European bureaucracy to end its obsession with ever closer union and concentrate instead on much more fundamental issues such as job creation and stimulating economic growth. And we know that Brexit has already demonstrated its great power to change the political landscape. David Cameron, who lost the referendum, also resigned as Prime Minister and as an MP. Nigel Farage, who won the referendum, also resigned as leader of his party for about 18 days, and then came back again, giving a whole new definition to Project Leave. Boris Johnson, he resigned from the leadership of the Conservative Party even before he got it, with Michael Gove's kitchen knife in his back as a farewell gift. And then in the other big European events of the year, Roy Hodgson was forced out by some pretty poor results on the pitch, how the FA must regret asking him to leave now. And Chris Evans has gone as presenter of Top Gear. It's the Spice Girls all over again. It's Chris Evans as Ginger Spice. David Cameron can only be Posh Spice. Roy Hodgson is a natural as Sporty Spice. And that leaves us with just two. Boris Johnson, who clearly is Baby Spice, and then Nigel Farage as Scary Spice. The Spice Girls breakup has happened all over again. And it does mean that in Britain now, we are run by a woman with no elected mandate whose husband is called Philip. Right. Thank you for that one clap of applause. That made the crafting of that joke very worthwhile. I think from any of that, you draw any message, it is this: that we will continue to be optimistic and we will make this work, because that is what we have done as business in time immemorial. We have taken the circumstances in which we operate and we make the best of them, and we will do that with this as well.